It was just another morning at Brookstone High. The sun peeked over the rooftops, casting golden light onto the polished windows of one of Texas's most prestigious schools. Students rushed through the halls, some laughing in tight circles, others scribbling down last-minute homework. It was noisy, alive, and ordinary, but not for one boy. Ethan Cooper walked in quietly, head down, his heavy boots tapping against the clean tiles. Unlike the other students in their designer shoes and air of confidence, Ethan's hands still bore the calluses of farm work, and his clothes carried the faint scent of early morning soil. He didn't say much, not because he had nothing to say, but because no one really listened. And maybe deep down he'd gotten used to being invisible. But today, something felt different. Today, the world would finally see him. Ethan took his seat in the back of the classroom, hoping for just another quiet day. But his history teacher, Ms. Hartley, had other plans. A woman of strict routines and sharper words, she held her classroom like a courtroom, where only the perfect students ever felt safe. And Ethan didn't fit that mold. As the lesson on the Civil War dragged on, Ethan fought to stay focused. His body still ached from the early morning chores, feeding animals, lifting sacks of grain, cleaning the barn. When Ms. Hartley called on him, his mind went blank. Mr. Cooper, perhaps if you spent less time with pigs and more with your textbook, you wouldn't embarrass yourself. The class chuckled. Ethan lowered his gaze, a blush creeping up his neck. But Ms. Hartley wasn't finished. Frankly, I don't see the point in wasting my time on students who are clearly destined for the dirt. Maybe you'd be better off plowing fields than studying history. The laughter died. Even the usual troublemakers fell silent. Ethan stood slowly, fists clenched at his sides. I may not be like everyone else here, he said, his voice shaking but strong, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve respect. Ms. Hartley raised an eyebrow, lips curled in disdain. Then prove it, or leave. And just like that, Ethan turned, grabbed his backpack, and walked out, his dignity intact, but his heart shattered. The classroom remained frozen in silence, not a whisper, not a breath. Ethan stood there, still, calm, but inside him, a storm was raging. His hands trembled slightly as he reached down to pick up his worn-out backpack. He didn't say a word, no angry outburst, no tearful plea. Just a look, a single look at Ms. Hartley, filled not with hate, but with something far more powerful. Dignity, strength, and the unspoken question, is this really what you call education? As he walked out of the classroom, every step echoed with quiet pride. He had been humiliated, yes, but he had not been broken. He chose to leave, before his spirit was crushed by a system that saw value only in test scores and family names. The next morning, as the sun cast its golden hue over Ridgewood High, no one expected that the day would become one of the most unforgettable in the school's history. A deep, rhythmic thudding sound echoed in the distance, foreign, unfamiliar, and growing louder by the second. Students looked up, puzzled. Teachers peeked out from classrooms as loose papers rustled in the growing breeze. Then it happened. A sleek black helicopter, polished and gleaming, descended from the sky like something out of a movie. It bore the insignia of O'Connell Agritech, one of the largest names in the sustainable farming across the country. The powerful gusts from its rotors swept across the football field, making the earth tremble slightly beneath their feet. It was as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Students rushed outside, phones in hand, faces lit up with curiosity, awe, and confusion. Who is that? What's going on? Whispers spread like wildfire. A few were already live streaming the surreal moment. The helicopter door swung open. Out stepped a tall, commanding man in a crisp gray suit, Mr. Graham O'Connell, the founder and CEO of one of America's most respected agricultural empires. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his every movement filled with quiet power and presence. Walking beside him was Liam, the same farm kid who had been humiliated and dismissed from class just a day before. But this Liam was different. He walked with quiet strength, his back straight, eyes calm, no trace of shame, only quiet dignity. Nobody said a word. No one dared to. The arrival of the helicopter, the presence of the billionaire grandfather, and the return of the boy who was once ignored froze the entire school in stunned silence. All eyes turned to the front entrance, where the two figures were now headed. The real storm was just about to begin. Inside the school's main corridor, silence hung thick in the air. Standing tall in his finely tailored suit was Mr. Jonathan Blake, Ethan's grandfather. More than just a farmer. He was a visionary, a pioneer of sustainable agriculture, and the man whose foundation quietly funded half the school's programs. Beside him, Ethan stood quietly, a stark contrast to the humiliation he endured just the day before. "I understand there was an issue involving my grandson," Mr. Blake said, his voice calm but firm. Ms. Burns straightened herself nervously. "Mr. Blake, I treat all my students fairly." "Is that so?" he interrupted smoothly, pulling a folded check from his coat. "Because this school receives substantial support from the Blake Foundation. I personally funded the science lab and the history department you proudly lead." The color drained from Ms. Burns's face. "And yet, you thought it acceptable to belittle my grandson for growing up on a farm? For working hard before the sun rises?" He took a step closer. "I taught Ethan that dignity comes from effort, not privilege. Maybe it's time you learned the same." Whispers rippled through the hall. Ms. Burns stood frozen. Then unexpectedly, Ethan stepped forward. His voice, though soft, carried a powerful weight. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want to be respected like anyone else." Ms. Burns, for the first time, looked at him not with contempt, but with remorse. I understand. I'm sorry, Ethan." Mr. Blake nodded slowly. "Respect isn't earned by wealth or status. It's earned through integrity, and my grandson has that in spades." And in that moment, the power shifted. Not because of money, but because of truth. From that day on, something changed at Redwood High. Ethan didn't walk the halls with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. The snickers faded, replaced by nods of recognition, even admiration. He was no longer just the farmer's kid. He was Ethan Blake, the boy who stood his ground when it mattered most. Ms. Burns, too, changed. Slowly but surely, she softened. She listened more, judged less, and even apologized publicly during class, setting an example few expected. She had learned a lesson not from a book, but from a student she once dismissed. And Mr. Blake? He didn't make a grand speech or demand anything more. His work and the message he left behind spoke volumes. You don't have to wear a suit to deserve respect. Sometimes a pair of muddy boots carries more honor than 1,000 polished shoes. Seasons passed, yet the story of Ethan continued to echo through Redwood High like a legend. Ms. Burns began hosting Life Story Fridays, where students shared their experiences outside the classroom. And for the first time, classmates discovered that behind every face, every quiet student, every tired eye, was a story worth hearing. Even some of the students who once mocked Ethan visited his farm. They fed animals, pulled vegetables from the earth, and understood, for the first time, the kind of hard work that puts food on every table. Ethan didn't boast. He didn't need to. His actions had already taught the greatest lesson. Sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest voices when they speak with truth and walk with integrity. Years later at graduation, Ethan was invited to speak. He stood at the podium, not as the underdog, but as a symbol of change. And with thousands watching, he said just one simple thing. "Thank you for finally seeing me." And that was enough. One boy, one lesson, one school changed forever.